Okay, so this week we're going to have a look at firewalls and perimeter security. So firewalls for perimeter security in particular. So this week we're going to look at firewalls and firewalls in terms of perimeter security in particular. So we're going to kind of try and give you an introduction to some of the concepts. Have a look at, so this is the kind of first half, have a look at the kind of topologies and the way we might use these things, so the kind of design of these things, which we're hoping you'll use for the coursework. We're going to look at rule sets, and then we're going to look at sort of architectures or technologies or the different types of firewall in the second half. So we'll look a little bit more specific, what things are used for. And again, we're at master's level, okay, so it's not, I want to know the 5 types of firewalls, I want to know the differences and where I might use them, and detail on what strengths and weaknesses of the different types of firewall. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for, and yeah, so in a couple of weeks' time, so we're here at the moment, we're on kind of unit 4 or in week 5, I think that's right. And in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be having this class test, yeah. So it's 25% of your mark, graded. It's really there to see how you're getting on, if you're at the right level, if you're taking in the materials. So it's only 25%. So if you don't do so well in that, there's still plenty of marks to get back and plenty of time. Okay, so it's a good kind of test to see where we are. So it's going to be on the theory and a little bit of practical from the first few weeks. Okay, so everything up until that week basically. So if you're having to catch up with the labs or anything like that, then make sure you sort of done that by then. Okay. All right. So the first part we'll have a kind of look at the fundamentals and just the sort of basic concepts, and then we'll dig a bit deeper, and then we'll look at the types in the second hour. Okay. So why firewalls? So from our kind of look at network threats a couple of weeks ago, mitigation of risk. Okay, so to mitigate risk against our assets is one of our kind of main things. So perimeter security, whether it's perimeter security at the actual perimeter of an organization or perimeter security at different perimeters within the organization to segregate our networks up, mitigation of risk. So containment. Our second one there is segregation of privacy. So containment, segregation of our network so we can contain threats, so we can slow an attacker down, so we can monitor things. So jumping ahead slightly. So privacy, so hiding things inside our network, hiding networks within our network, splitting our network up and putting things on our boundaries so we can keep our data and our assets hidden. So one of the reasons is to protect against our first sort of wave of attacks or our first type of attacks we looked at a couple of weeks ago, which is reconnaissance. Yeah. So if we can hide our networks and we can hide our servers, we can hide our services, we can put layered security in, we can protect against someone doing recon on our network. Okay, finding our assets and finding things where they can get a foothold or boxes or services they can attack. Okay, to apply the security policy. So we kind of looked at that very briefly. If you watched the third part of the lecture a couple of weeks ago, we kind of looked at that high level, just after the malware section, we looked at the high level security policy being kind of propagated down to the technical policies, then the technical policy, security policies driving things like firewall rule sets, IDS setups, maybe NAT, maybe our configuration of our networks. So applying our security policies, and in particular with perimeters and firewalls, generating choke points, so we can gather all the traffic together and we can apply security policies in the one place. Okay, so minimizing our ways in and out of networks and creating choke points where we can actually apply the security policy. Excuse me. And importantly, monitoring. Okay, so all the kind of controls we'll look at in this course and in most of the modules, it's important to be able to log and monitor things. So why is it important to log things? A couple of quick answers, anyone?
For audits.
Find out what? Say again?
For auditing.
So for auditing, yeah. So for forensics, for network forensics, for incident response. So look at a bit more of that in the incident response module. But so to audit what's happening as we go continually, and if incidents are there, we have data which we can actually analyze and try and find out what's happened. Okay, so that's what covers that. So this is a kind of very basic, about the most basic thing we could do to represent a firewall. Okay, so again, choke point, bringing things together, and we're going to produce some sort of set of rules based on our policies for our perimeter, for our firewalls, which allow good traffic through and hopefully stop traffic we don't want to get through. Okay, so bad traffic, maybe protocols we don't want people to use, it may be attacks, and various different things. Okay, so do we know where the firewall word comes from?
From buildings.
From what?
From buildings.
Buildings, yeah. So buildings and vehicles, where we used to have some sort of partition, some sort of thing to stop the fire spreading, to stop the bad stuff getting through. So that's a kind of most basic. Yeah, so that could be question 1 in the test. Okay, so here's a sort of analogy. So there's lots of analogies. If you read there's lots of firewall books and lots of filtering books, lots of perimeter security. I'll just pop that up. Lots of books on perimeter security. Quite a lot of old books which are actually quite good. Things like the Wily Hacker book by Bill Cheswick. That's quite a good book, even though it's fairly old now. But you get lots of analogies, lots of different ways to describe these security controls that we use. So I think this is a particularly good one. So firewall's a bit like the kind of castle gates. So I think to be more specific, it's a little bit more like the guard on the gates. So the guard on the gates will allow certain people through and they'll stop other people. Yeah, so most obviously what we're trying to stop here, these pictures. Anything? So enemy. So from where? So from the outside. Yeah, so it may seem very obvious, but we're trying to stop the bad guys, our enemies from the outside. But what else might the firewall guard do? If you want to leave, if you live in the castle and you want to leave and go out, the firewall guard may let you out and may let you back in. So why do they let you back in? So, because you've left from the inside, which is safe, which is our trusted area, they'll allow you back in. And as we'll go on, you'll see that is quite similar to how most firewalls work. So I heard a couple of people last week saying in the lab they had some problems with the ICMP. So they could communicate out the way from the Windows box. When you connect your GNS router to your host, you can connect out the way and you'll get your traffic back. Yeah. But when you try to ping or to send ICMP traffic to the Windows host, it was dropped by the Windows host firewall. Okay, so we had to remove that just for the local loopback interface. Not the whole firewall, just that small part, and hopefully everybody put that back after, although as you say the machines are reset. Okay, so that's quite an important thing, and we'll get to that. That's a stateful type firewall, but that's a typical process and the traffic flow from a firewall nowadays. Okay, so this is probably a little bit out of date, but it's really just trying to give you some indication of different types of firewall. So as we just spoken about, we've got personal firewalls. So we've got things like Windows firewalls and this is software which protect our interface, typically going out to the internet. We have server-based firewalls, or probably to be more accurate, less server-based now, more software firewalls running on non-specific hardware. So today in the lab we're going to look at the most basic firewalls, so firewalls from quite a long time ago, which are still used for certain things, and it's good to start on these things. We're going to go hopefully quite deep, looking at Cisco command line packet filtering firewalls. So we're going to have a look at some basic packet filtering, which some of you might have done and some of you may not have. But we'll build up over the next few weeks to a full kind of system with proxies and various types of traffic firewalling. Okay, so you could put that in that sort of type router with software running on it. So we've got things like IP tables. So we've got Linux. Most Linux comes with IP tables, which is the software firewall, and it actually handles. So the difference is, your personal firewall is typically one interface. You're firewalling that one interface out to the internet. What we're talking about here is probably two interfaces, so traffic actually going through and some sort of firewall software for two interfaces. So segregating two different networks rather than just kind of protecting your end host on one network. And then we go up to something like device-based, hardware-based firewalls. So why might device-based firewalls, why would we spend the extra money buying devices that do firewalling?
It's faster.
Probably faster.
Yeah.
Why?
Because they've been designed to do one thing.
So they've been designed to do one thing. So maybe they maybe got hardware which is specifically designed to do that, rather than running a sort of piece of software on a non-specific piece of hardware. Okay, so it's quite a lot. We've got on campus, we've got a fair bit of Cisco and Juniper kit if you want to actually use it. If you want to go further, just if you've got spare time, you've done your CCD security and you want to go and play with some wires and plug in some firewalls. You can do all the labs on the hardware as well, just if you're interested. So we're going to virtualize Cisco devices. We're going to look at routers with software on them, and hopefully some other bits and bobs and different types of firewalls. So that's a kind of what else was I going to say. So I suppose things like software firewalls we can extend into virtual firewalls. We can extend into things like application firewalls. We're on an application server, protecting that service, or possibly even as a separate box sitting in front of specific applications. And we've got proxies as well, which we'll have a look at later on too, just in a crossover. But probably typically would be done on servers of some description. So yeah, I think we've kind of talked through that. So where's the perimeter here then? So whereabouts is the firewall in a Windows firewall? Where is it? May seem like a silly question, but where's the actual perimeter?
Inside the
service.
Say again?
It's inside the box you protect.
So inside the Windows box, yeah. So actually, I would probably say it's kind of sitting on the interface. So it's sitting on the outside of the interface. Before the interface, yeah, I would say so. I would say it's sitting, do the filtering before it does anything else, before it comes in. So the Windows firewall is quite interesting the way they've set it up. So you can basically have different profiles, which we sort of looked at last week. So I think in the lab you were, was it the public profile, and we just went into the specific public profile, which is typically the profile you choose when you connect to what type of network.
Public network.
So some sort of open network, maybe, you're in the airport and you say, yeah, this is a public network I'm connecting to. So typically, by default, the firewall rule set for the public network domain is typically a little bit stricter than the firewall rule set for a private domain. So what do you choose when you're at home?
Home.
You choose home or private. I don't, I choose public, because otherwise it opens all your file sharing by default. Okay, so it's worth having a little look at these firewall rule sets. So you can see the rule set here, and that rule set is actually 3 different types of rule set there. So we've got public, domain, and private. So each of these rules is kind of repeated, and you can see for some rules, such as file and printer sharing, domain and private and public have different rules switched on and switched off. Okay, and then you've obviously got the interfaces as well. So what we did was we went in and looked at the public domain, which because that happened to be the one which we had chosen to connect to, and we switched off the firewall on our loopback interface only. Okay, so it's worth having a little look at the Windows firewall. I think that's okay. So I think we've talked about that a little bit. So this probably typically the types of things you'd be looking at nowadays would be things like routers with software running on them, or proxies, or software firewalls sitting on an application server, or something like that, which we'll look at later. And then we've got appliance-based, which again so it's a Cisco one with the Cisco GUI, and that's the equivalent. A Juniper one with the Juniper GUI, and that's the kind of equivalent command line interface to the Cisco interface we've been using in the labs already. Okay, so we're going to stick mainly with the command line interface. We may have a look at the ASDM GUI for the Cisco ASA box if I can get it working, but it's a little bit tricky with the flash memory on the virtualized devices. It's not so bad. It's easy enough on the physical device, but I think we might be able to get it working. So we'll hopefully have a little look at that and see, compare the difference. So again, it's quite an interesting subject. If you're actually going to have a little search on Google Scholar, you'll see there's quite a few papers looking at different types of configuration interfaces, and up until quite recently anyway, from what I had read, the CLI was always more trusted by professionals who thought you had more granularity, and you didn't have that layer of software in between, which could have some problems. Could have some vulnerabilities. It could have some misconfiguration. So the command line, you know exactly what you're doing. Okay, so you're down at the lowest level, you're down at the nitty-gritty, which is why one of the reasons we're using that. Okay. And just to kind of introduce, the type of thinking you should be thinking about, this sort of level of thinking, or this type of thinking, is compare and contrast. So have a look at these things, maybe have a read of a couple of papers. I've got some papers on Moodle. I've got a couple of slightly more up-to-date things as well I found this week. And we'll pop on about configuration complexity and some other stuff to do with firewalls. So comparing, in this case, software versus hardware, faster, generally slower to operate because you've got specific optimized hardware. So probably quite importantly, the actual device itself. So this is something you look at with all these types of controls, is the security that it provides, but also the security of the device. Yep, so why is that?
Again, there's legal point in having a firewall in a non-very secure device, because it can be
attached on the firewall itself. Yeah.
Switch off.
Yeah. So it's not all so much whether the device is just insecure, but it's the way the firewalls work. So when we get to proxies, we'll have a look at the difference. You can use firewalls in a sort of transparent manner, but some firewalls have to have things open on them, so you can use them in a certain way, which obviously makes them inherently slightly less secure. So things like that. If you're using some sort of software firewall, if you're putting something out there, if you're connecting to a service on a firewall, for example, such as a proxy, that device will need hardened. So it's something to bear in mind. And the cost as well, obviously, is quite an important factor in the real world.